I'm Emma. I'm 38, an HR manager by trade, and for the last few months, I'd been battling my husband silently. Watching my marriage collapse one polite lie at a time, I learned that the most dangerous fights don't even look like fights at all. I kept my voice even. I smiled through dinners. I coached myself to stay calm for the kids. But behind all that quiet, I was taking notes. Because while Mark thought he was painting me as the villain in front of our children, what he didn't realize was that he was handing me the perfect script to end his entire performance once and for all. Until recently, I thought I had things under control. We lived in a 3-bedroom house just outside the city. Our kids, Ella, 12, and Noah, 9, were the best parts of my day. I'd come home from HR meetings exhausted but grateful, stepping into a warm kitchen, listening to their stories. Or at least, that's how it used to be. Lately, dinners had gone quiet. Forks scraped plates. Mark and I exchanged these cold, polite glances that felt like strangers pretending they remembered how to love. He'd sigh when I asked Ella about school. He'd interrupt Noah with a gentle "Buddy, Mom doesn't need all that." I let it go, every time, because I didn't want to teach them to fight. But the real fracture came after one of those late-night arguments that ended in silence. We didn't yell, we didn't even look at each other by the end. He accused me of being controlling. I told him he was absent. We both went to sleep angry. The next morning, Mark got up early. I heard his voice low in the living room while I stood in the kitchen stirring coffee. He was talking to Ella and Noah, soft, conspiratorial. I heard Ella's tiny, frightened, "But why?" and Mark's calm reply I couldn't make out. When they came back, they looked like they'd seen something they shouldn't have. Ella wouldn't meet my eyes. Noah held onto the arm of the couch like he might float away without it. Finally, Ella spoke so quietly I almost missed it. "Dad says you're the problem." I felt the floor tilt. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I wanted to scream, to demand he explain it to my face, to drag the truth out of him. But I didn't. I set my cup down. I smoothed my hair. I looked at them and said, "Okay, we'll talk later." Because in that moment, I realized something important. If he wanted to cast me as the villain, I wouldn't argue. I would let him explain the custody terms himself. And when he did, they'd see exactly who the problem really was. I used to think our family was normal. Maybe that was my first mistake. We'd been married for 14 years. We met at work. I was in HR. He was a project manager. Mark could charm anyone. He had this easy way of making people laugh, of listening so intently you felt like the most interesting person in the room. It's what drew me in at first. Our early years were good. We both worked hard, bought our house together, had Ella and then Noah. I went part-time for a while after Noah was born, then back full-time when he started school. We had our share of arguments, money, chores, his mother's interfering phone calls, but nothing I thought we couldn't handle. But things changed slowly. That's how these things get you. Not with a slap, but with silence. I started noticing how Mark answered questions the kids asked me, like he couldn't let me have the last word. When Noah asked if he could sleep over at a friend's house, I said we'd check with the parents first. Mark cut in with a grin, "Don't worry, Mom's just being overprotective." He called it teasing. Ella once asked for help with math homework, and I sat with her for an hour. When she went to bed, Mark said, "You know you make her anxious, right? Hovering like that." It was always said so casually. Calm, reasonable. I asked him once why he spoke to me that way. He smiled like I'd said something cute. "You're too sensitive, Em. That's your problem." I tried to brush it off. I didn't want to fight in front of the kids. I kept the peace, even when it felt like swallowing glass. The last year was the worst. We'd sit down for dinner and not talk at all. Sometimes he wouldn't even look at me. When he did, it was with this thin smile that made me feel small. The kids picked up on it. I could see it in the way Noah watched us, eyes darting back and forth. Ella got quieter. She used to chatter endlessly about her friends and school, but she started texting me from her room instead of coming downstairs. One night, after the kids went to bed, I tried to talk to Mark. I told him I thought we needed counseling. He didn't even argue. He just shook his head slowly and said, "I'm not paying someone to tell me you're right." I think that's when I realized how far gone we were. After that, he stopped pretending. He'd correct me right in front of the kids. If I asked them to do chores, he'd roll his eyes and say, "You're such a drill sergeant." Noah started copying that tone. Ella would glance at Mark before answering me, trying to read what was safe to say. It wasn't just undermining, it was dividing. And then late one night, when I couldn't sleep, I found an email on his open laptop. It was from a divorce lawyer. "Draft terms attached. Will review custody strategy on call." My heart clenched. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the laptop. I didn't even know he'd retained someone. He hadn't said a word. That's when I understood the plan. He wasn't just leaving. He was setting the stage to make sure the kids would want to leave with him. That morning, after our fight, he sat them down while I was making coffee. I heard the quiet, careful voice he used with clients. I heard Ella's scared, but why? And when she told me, "Dad says you're the problem," I knew it was a line he'd rehearsed. I didn't react. Not because I wasn't angry, not because it didn't tear me in half, but because if he was going to make me the villain in their eyes, I'd let him do it all the way. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was going to let him explain the custody terms himself. And when he did, I'd make sure the truth was right there for everyone to see. After that morning, the air in our house felt like walking through fog. The kids avoided me in small, heartbreaking ways they didn't even understand. Ella stopped asking for homework help. Noah answered in clipped single words. I wanted to grab them and demand they listen, to tell them their father was twisting things, but I heard his voice in my head. "See? She's unstable." So I swallowed every retort. Nights were the hardest. I'd hear their bedroom doors click shut, and sometimes I'd stand in the hallway, pressing my ear against Ella's door just to make sure she was there, breathing. I could tell she'd been crying. I wanted to go in, to hold her, to explain everything, but I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of sounding desperate or angry. That was what he wanted them to see. I'd retreat to my room, shut the door, and sit in the dark, listening to the TV hum from the living room. Mark never asked me to sit with him. He didn't come to bed until late. Sometimes I'd see the glow of the screen on his face as he scrolled on his phone, completely checked out of the family he claimed I was destroying. One day, after school pickup, the silence in the car was so heavy I thought I might suffocate. I tried to talk to them about their day. Noah just looked out the window. Ella finally snapped, "Can we just not talk right now?" I forced a smile, blinked away the sting in my eyes, and nodded. That night I cried in the shower so they wouldn't hear me. I felt like I was losing them one piece at a time, and Mark wasn't even trying to hide what he was doing anymore. He started sending these deliberately passive-aggressive texts, just confirming you're picking them up since you're always late. I wasn't late. He was setting up a record, a paper trail. That's when I understood. This wasn't a fight between spouses, it was a custody strategy. So I called a lawyer. I didn't tell Mark. My lawyer's voice was steady and calm, and she said exactly what I needed to hear. "He's building a case. You need to build yours. Stay calm. Document everything." That became my mantra. I started saving every text, screenshots of the ones where he mocked me, notes from the therapist he refused to see anymore, emails where he said, "You handle school stuff? That's your thing?" When he skipped parent-teacher conferences. I even asked Ella's teacher if she'd noticed anything. She said Ella seemed withdrawn lately, and I wrote that down too. But in the house, I kept my tone even. When the kids asked hard questions, I answered simply, "Is it true you hate Dad?" I don't hate him. We disagree on some things. "Did you make him move out?" I didn't make him do anything. Grown-ups make their own choices. They looked confused. Sometimes they were angry, but I refused to take the bait. I refused to defend myself like a cornered animal. Meanwhile, Mark didn't let up. He'd tell them things I could hear from the next room. "You know how your mom is," in that knowing tone, the one meant to pull them onto his side. Once, I heard Noah ask him quietly if I was going to make them leave. Mark sighed like he was carrying the weight of the world and said, "I don't know, buddy. I really don't know anymore." It was masterful. He played the victim perfectly. I felt my anger boiling under my skin, but I held on to my lawyer's words, "Stay calm. Document everything." One night, Noah came to my door with his eyes red. He whispered, "Is it my fault?" That almost broke me. I pulled him into my lap and said, "None of this is your fault. You don't have to fix anything. That's not your job." He cried himself to sleep in my bed while I stared at the ceiling, making silent promises to myself. I promised that if Mark wanted to call me the problem, I'd let him say it. I'd let him spell out every accusation in front of a judge. I wouldn't scream or plead or argue. I'd just be ready with the truth. He didn't know I was gathering statements from people who'd seen him belittle me, that Ella's teacher agreed to speak if it came to that our therapist's notes documented the sessions he refused to attend. In the meantime, he told the kids I was cold and didn't even care. And I let him. I let him dig his hole one word at a time, because the next time he tried to paint me as the villain, he wouldn't be whispering it to children who trusted him. He'd be explaining it to a judge under oath, with all of my careful documentation laid out in front of him. I didn't need to win them back with frantic explanations. I just needed to let him keep talking, because that was the plan. I wouldn't convince them with words. He would prove it with his own. By then, my entire life felt like a performance I was staging for an audience that didn't know the script yet, but I did. I got meticulous. I kept a private notebook locked in my work bag where I recorded everything. The dates he refused to attend counseling, the times he skipped school events, every subtle undermining text. Even the tone he used when he said, "You know how your mom is," to the kids as though he were sharing some big, tragic secret. It was hard work acting unaffected. At dinner, when Noah ignored me or Ella replied with a clipped, "Sure," I'd excuse myself to the kitchen and count to 10. I refused to cry where they could see it. Mark would just look at me from across the table with that satisfied little smile. He thought I was crumbling. He wasn't entirely wrong. After they went to bed, I'd sit on the bathroom floor with the fan running to drown out my sobs, but then I'd wipe my eyes and get back up. I had to, because if he was going to lie about who I was, I would make sure the truth was stronger than anything he could say. I spoke to my lawyer every week. She was calm, practical, never sugarcoated anything. If he's trying to get sole custody, we have to show the pattern. Don't argue with him. Don't react. Let him demonstrate exactly who he is. I told her about the email I'd found on his laptop. She nodded. Good, save it. Don't confront him. That was the hardest part. He wanted me to blow up, to scream at him in front of the kids. He wanted them to see me furious and out of control so he could shake his head sadly and say, "See? This is what I deal with." So I didn't. I let him think he was winning. I began collecting witnesses. I asked my sister to write down what she saw that Christmas Eve when Mark ridiculed me in front of everyone for burning the roast, turning the kids into an audience for his jokes. I spoke to Ella's teacher, who said she'd noticed how withdrawn Ella had gotten and that she'd be willing to talk if it came to it. Even our couples counselor provided documentation of how many sessions Mark skipped, the way he refused to continue. I stayed polite in every message I sent him. I never raised my voice in front of the kids, even when he pushed me. One evening, he called me an unfit mother right in the living room, loud enough that Ella heard. I remember her eyes going wide, waiting for me to lash out. I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and walked into the kitchen. Inside, my heart was beating so hard I thought I might pass out. But when I looked back at Ella, she looked confused. That was good. Confusion was better than certainty on his side. The kids didn't see everything, but they saw enough. They saw me pack their lunches every morning. They saw me at every school play, sitting in the front row with my phone recording. They saw who helped with homework and who sat on the couch staring at his phone. When I caught Mark rolling his eyes as Noah told a long story about dinosaurs, I wanted to scream at him to at least pretend to care. Instead, I just asked Noah to tell me more. I wasn't perfect. Some nights I went to bed with my teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. Some nights I hated him so much I scared myself. But I didn't show it. He accused me of being cold, robotic, manipulative. "Why don't you ever show them how you really feel?" he spat at me one night. I met his eyes and said quietly, "I'm showing them exactly who I am." He didn't get it, but he would. I knew there was going to be a hearing. He was pushing for a formal custody arrangement. He thought he'd prove I was unstable, unfit, too controlling. He even told the kids, "You won't have to worry about Mom making all the rules soon." I never corrected him in front of them. I let that promise hang there like a noose he'd tied himself. My lawyer helped me prepare a binder of documentation. Every text, every email, every witness statement, neatly tabbed and ready. She warned me it wouldn't be easy, that he'd try to perform for the judge the way he performed for the kids. "Let him," I said, because I knew something he didn't. He'd already written his own closing argument for me, and all I had to do was make sure everyone heard it. The day of the hearing felt like waiting for an execution I hadn't deserved. I woke up before dawn, lying in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The kids were asleep in their rooms. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if they'd ever forgive me for not telling them everything. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table alone. My lawyer texted me, "Stay calm, tell the truth, let him talk." It wasn't just legal strategy anymore, it was survival. Mark was already downstairs before the kids were up. He acted like it was any other morning. He even whistled while he buttered toast. I could barely look at him without shaking. When Ella and Noah came down, they seemed unsure. Ella clutched her backpack like armor. Noah didn't say anything. I kissed them both on the head. They accepted it stiffly. I whispered, "I love you," but I'm not sure they heard it. We didn't tell them exactly what was happening that day, just that we had something important to settle. I asked my sister to pick them up from school and keep them overnight so they wouldn't see us come home after. I didn't want them to see me if I lost. Driving to court, I felt like I might vomit. My lawyer kept reminding me to breathe. "He's going to talk first," she said. "I know. Don't react." "I won't." I kept repeating it in my head like a prayer. When we got there, he was already in the hallway talking to his attorney. He looked so calm, so reasonable in his navy suit. When our eyes met, he gave me this practiced, sympathetic frown, like he was sorry I'd forced all this. I turned away. Inside the courtroom, it was clinical. Cool. The judge was brisk, but not unkind. When Mark was asked to explain why he wanted primary custody, he cleared his throat, sat a little straighter, and spoke with that same calm voice he used on the kids. "Your Honor, I want what's best for them. I'm worried about their emotional well-being. Their mother has a tendency to be controlling. She doesn't respect their boundaries. She can be unstable. I don't think she's a bad person, but I don't think she's good for them full-time." He delivered it like he was reading a bedtime story. Software measured. I saw the judge nod, taking notes. I felt my lungs burn, but I didn't speak. Mark went on about our marriage breaking down because of my unreasonable expectations, about me berating the kids over chores, about how I refused to compromise and made everything about her way. He even talked about our therapy sessions, conveniently leaving out that he'd skipped most of them. When he finished, he looked at the judge, then at me. I could see it in his eyes. He thought he'd nailed it. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, may I respond?" And so we did. She handed over the binder, every text message where he belittled me, emails where he wrote that school events were your thing so he wouldn't have to go, notes from the therapist documenting how many appointments he refused to attend. Witness statements from my sister about the way he ridiculed me in front of family. Ella's teacher's note about her sudden change in demeanor. I watched Mark's face twitch. Just once, he tried to keep that calm expression, but he couldn't quite hold it. The judge read carefully, asked questions. My lawyer invited me to speak. I stood. My knees felt like water. I didn't look at Mark. I looked at the judge. I don't want to keep my kids from their father, I said quietly. I want them to have a relationship with him, but I also want them to be safe. To know they can talk about their feelings without being mocked or belittled. I don't want them forced to choose sides because one parent decides the other is the problem. I took a breath. I have never tried to turn them against him. I didn't even tell them any of this, because they're children. They deserve to be protected, not weaponized. My voice cracked at the end, but I didn't apologize for it. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock tick. Mark's attorney tried to redirect, but the judge stopped them. He turned to Mark. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Mark's mouth opened and closed. He looked at me. For the first time in months, he didn't look smug. He looked trapped. He tried to speak, but the judge was waiting. So he repeated the same line, only this time it sounded hollow. I just want what's best for them. The judge nodded, said they'd review everything and issue a temporary order that day. We sat in silence while he read. When he finally looked up, he was firm. Joint custody for now, with a structured schedule. Both parents will complete co-parenting counseling. I expect full cooperation. Ms. Thompson, my lawyer, has provided evidence of efforts to accommodate. Mr. Daniels, Mark, you will participate or risk a future reduction in time sharing. Mark's face fell. It wasn't sole custody for me, but it wasn't what he wanted either. He'd have to explain that to the kids, explain why the schedule was so formal now, why he had to go to counseling, why the judge didn't just give them to him outright. Explain in the car on the way home why everything he'd promised them about leaving me behind wasn't going to happen. I didn't have to tell them he'd lied. He was going to do that himself. When we left the courtroom, he tried to catch up to me in the hall. Emma, I turned. For a moment, I saw the man I married, the charming smile, the careful tone, but I wasn't falling for it. I'll see you at pickup, I said, and walked away. My lawyer squeezed my arm as we reached the doors. You did it, she whispered. I didn't feel victorious, just relieved. Because this wasn't about beating him. It was about telling the truth, even if I had to do it silently. He wanted to make me the villain, but he ended up explaining the terms himself. The days after the hearing felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, just heavy, like the hush after a storm when you're waiting to see what's left standing. Mark didn't try to spin things right away. For a couple of days, he barely texted at all. When he did, it was stiff and formal, confirming pickups, drop-offs, counseling dates. Gone was the mocking tone. Gone was the forced charm. It was like the courtroom had taken the wind out of him. The kids were wary at first. When I picked them up for my time, Ella barely spoke. Noah kept his head down, playing on his tablet. I didn't push. On the drive home, I said, we're going to have a schedule now. Dad and I both want you to know exactly what's happening so there aren't surprises. Noah just nodded. Ella stared out the window. That night, I made them spaghetti, their favorite. They both picked at it. I tried not to take it personally. When they went to bed, I sat in the living room alone. I let myself cry, but this time it felt different. Not hopeless, just real. The next day, Mark came to pick them up. I met him in the driveway. He wouldn't look at me. I handed over their bags. They know the plan? He asked. They know there's a schedule, I said calmly. I told them it's so everyone knows what to expect. He cleared his throat, looking like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just turned to the car and called for the kids. As they got in, I heard Ella ask, "Why do we need a schedule now?" Mark hesitated, and I didn't stay to listen. I went back inside. Because that was always the point. I didn't have to tell them he lied. He was going to have to explain it himself. Over the next weeks, things changed in small ways. Ella started asking me questions again, not about the divorce, just about school, friends, the things she used to share. Noah sat next to me on the couch without being asked. One evening, he fell asleep in my lap while we watched a movie. When I carried him to bed, he woke up long enough to whisper, "Love you, Mom." It wasn't all healed, not even close. But it was a start. I kept going to therapy. I kept collecting documentation because I wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over. But I also focused on the kids, on building something stable again. And in quiet moments, I reminded myself that staying calm wasn't weakness. It was the only way to win without destroying them in the process. Mark had tried to paint me as the problem. But in the end, he was the one who had to tell them why everything he promised didn't happen. He had to explain the custody terms himself. It's strange how victory can feel so quiet. Even now, there's no moment where I threw my fist in the air and celebrated. Instead, there's just this slow return to normal. The kids and I keep to our schedule. We talk more. We eat dinner together. Sometimes they're still guarded, and that hurts in ways I can't describe. But they're here. They're safe. And I'm patient, because trust rebuilds slowly and I won't rush them. I still see Mark at exchanges. He keeps it civil, but I see the bitterness in his eyes. He doesn't say much. I don't either. I don't need to. He knows what happened. He knows who showed up prepared, who stayed calm, who refused to turn the kids into weapons. And for anyone listening to this who's been told they're the problem, who's been painted as the villain in their own home, I want you to know, you don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to destroy someone to win. Sometimes the best revenge is calm truth and letting them explain themselves. If this helped you, or if you're going through it, stay with me. Subscribe. Let's figure out how to reclaim your story together.